It always strikes me how massive changes, huge innovations, they often start in really unexpected ways.
Yeah, like a penicillin being an accident.
Exactly. Or Post-it notes coming from failed glue. It makes you think about the, let's say, less obvious origin stories behind other big shifts.
Absolutely. And, well, that's kind of what we're digging into today. We're going beyond the usual story.
Right. We're taking a real deep dive into the foundational years of, well, a tech giant, Bill Gates.
Yep. We're drawing from his autobiography, Source Code, My Beginnings. And the idea isn't just to rehash the biography.
Not at all. Our mission here is to really get under the surface, understand the key things that shaped him early on based on his own account. Forget the sort of overnight genius idea.
Right. We want to look at the family dynamics, his childhood interests, those really pivotal moments, the relationships that kind of set the stage.
And find those surprising little insights, maybe, that hint at the tech leader he eventually became.
Okay, so let's maybe kick things off with his family. It's fascinating because both his mother's and his father's sides seem to have played, well, significant but quite different roles.
His mother's side, it sounds incredibly accomplished. You mentioned his great-grandfather, J.W. He wasn't just a banker.
No,
Yeah.
he was also mayor, state legislator, on the school board.
And a director at the Federal Reserve. That's establishing a real platform of wealth and opportunity right there.
For sure. And that strong foundation, it seems to continue with his grandmother, Lala. Apparently, she had this knack for connecting with everyone, and her sort of secret weapon, card playing, she was supposedly amazing at it, could hold her own against anyone.
Great. And it wasn't just a party trick, right? It got passed down.
Yeah, to his other grandmother, Gami, and his mother, Mary. And Bill himself, Lala nicknamed him Trey.
Like the three of clubs, because he was William Gates III.
Exactly. It's a little nod to that family lineage. But what's really insightful is this thread of strategic thinking, especially from the women on his mother's side.
Right, Gami, the valedictorian basketball player. She had that catchphrase for him.
Think smart, Trey.
Yeah, and those competitive family games, Monopoly, Risk, jigsaw puzzles, they sound less like fun and more like intellectual boot camp.
Totally. Okay, so shifting gears to his father's side. It sounds like a bit of a different story, maybe more hardship early on.
Seems like it. His paternal grandfather sold furniture and apparently carried some anxiety from, tough time selling newspapers up in Nome, Alaska.
Wow, Nome. That's rough.
Yeah, he's described as having a narrow view of the world, pretty strict rules.
Which contrasts a bit with Bill's father, William Henry Gates Sr., right?
Yeah.
He seemed more independent.
Definitely. Buying that model of Ford, Clarabelle, as a teen, even when his own dad wasn't keen on it, that shows some early drive for autonomy.
And he was the first in his family to go to college and then law school. That's a big step. Huge. And his father had a mentor too, Dorm Brayman. This guy was a high school dropout but built a successful millworks.
So representing a different kind of success. More hands-on, building things?
Exactly. And it's a small detail but interesting that his father dropped the third from his name in the Army to avoid ridicule. Kind of pragmatic.
So you see these different influences, shaping Bill's father, maybe the pragmatism from his own dad, but also the ambition and belief in potential from Brayman.
Right. And then his parents meet in student government at the University of Washington, ASUW.
Working together to overturn a ban on political speeches, no less. Seems like they shared a sense of purpose early on.
Definitely. And his mother, Mary Maxwell Gates. She sounds like a force of nature. Strong, ambitious, confident, involved in everything.
Met his father at UW, came from that family where, high achievement was just expected.
Absolutely. And that seems to have translated directly into the home environment they created. They really emphasized learning.
Like those dinner table discussions, modeled on Joseph Kennedy's family, assigning COPEX.
Yeah, exactly. Plus, Mary's community involvement, her social activism, hosting these parties that were really about discussion and networking. It paints a picture of a really stimulating home.
Engaged with the world. Even their Christmas traditions sound like they were really important for family connection.
Absolutely. It seems like a very close-knit, intellectually vibrant family, but with these different strands of influence coming together.
Okay, so a really rich background there. Now let's focus on young Bill himself. His early development, his interests. It sounds like he wasn't exactly a typical kid from the start.
Not at all. His mom apparently warned his preschool teachers he was different from his sister Christy, who was more of a rule follower, got good grades, that sort of thing.
And the preschool director called him rebellious, with moonshot plans at 4.
Yeah, kind of amazing, right? That intensity seemed to channel into things like puzzles.
Ah, you can see the connection there, can't you? To the logical problem solving needed for coding later on.
Exactly. And his love for books early on, just soaking up facts, getting totally lost in reading. That's a classic sign of that ability to
Which
hyperfocus.
would obviously serve him well. And math, too. He loved math.
Yeah, it appealed to his sense of a rational world, where there are definite answers. It clearly built his confidence in his own intellect.
It's interesting how even small things seem to contribute, like being a library assistant.
Right. He treated reshelving books like a game, apparently.
Hmm.
And the librarian, Mrs. Caffier, encouraged him, which led him to read more widely biographies, ideas.
But socially, it wasn't always easy. When they moved, and he started at Laurelhurst Elementary.
Seems like he felt a bit insecure initially. He adopted that class clown persona for a while.
A defense mechanism, maybe?
Probably. But he did make a good friend, Boomer. They played tons of Risk, were pretty physical kids. It's funny, his mom signed him up for football, and even though he was small, he stuck with it.
And then, the Delaware Project. We have to talk about this. A 177-page report on Delaware.
I know, it's way beyond a normal school project. It totally foreshadows those deep dives he became famous for.
It wasn't just about a grade, clearly. It showed that ability to just immerse himself, research like crazy, and produce something substantial. Understanding complex systems, even then.
Absolutely. And you hear those stories about his intense concentration, like ignoring the family dinner
The
table.
famous "I'm thinking" incident.
Right, that kind of single-mindedness. It actually got to the point where his parents sought advice from a Dr. Cressy.
And the advice was surprising.
Yeah, basically ease up, give him more freedom, which must have been tough, especially for his mom, who seemed very proactive.
But maybe giving him that space worked, along with seeing his parents' friends who were actually doing things, making products, building companies, shaping policy.
Yeah, he wasn't just reading about success, he was seeing it up close. Which brings us to Lakeside School. This feels like a major turning point.
Definitely. He starts there, feels a bit different initially from the other kids who seemed more, I don't know, self-assured.
But it's at Lakeside he meets Kent Evans. Sounds like a real intellectual match for him. Politically engaged, shared business interests, even in middle school.
Remarkable. And crucially, Lakeside is where he first encounters computers. 1968. The teletype machine.
Can you just quickly explain what that teletype actually was for people who didn't experience that era?
Sure. Yeah, it wasn't like a modern computer at all. Think of an electric typewriter connected usually over phone lines to a big distant computer. You'd type commands.
And the responses would get printed out on paper.
Exactly. Clunky, slow, noisy.
Yeah.
But for them, it was magic. Access to computing power.
And that first program he wrote, Tic-Tac-Toe. The big lesson was that the computer was, well, dumb. It needed exact logical instructions.
That fundamental idea clearly stuck. And working with Kent on that random sentence generator, it's like a primitive AI looking back.
Yeah, charming, but it shows them already playing with code creatively, together.
And the math teacher, Fred Wright, deserves a shout out here, right? His hands-off approach to the computer room.
Totally. No formal curriculum, just access. It fostered this amazing self-directed learning environment for the kids who were drawn to it.
Which led them to finding ways to get more computer time, like at that company C Cubed, exploiting the free time, learning the PDP-10.
It sounds almost like they were computer time bandits, sneaking in, learning as fast as they could.
And then finding those PDP-10 manuals in the trash. That's like the ultimate hacker origin story moment.
Right. Teenagers staying up all night deciphering these complex technical manuals for this powerful mainframe computer, the PDP-10, that was like finding the keys to the kingdom for them.
And they put that knowledge to use, developing a war simulation program, coding complex scenarios. Even when they lost access at C-Cube, he just kept going.
Yeah, think about that miserable hike on Low Divide. He wasn't even present, really. He was mentally coding.
Specifically, that formula evaluator logic. He said himself that code became the seed for so much of his later work.
It's an incredible link, a physically uncomfortable experience leading directly to a core piece of his future foundation.
Even other hikes, like the life-saving trail, gave him insights, like realizing the extent of his father's network.
And then success in that four-state math competition. That seems like a moment where his self-perception shifted, right? Beyond just the class clown.
Yeah, recognizing his own abilities on a bigger stage, and that weird experiment of pretending not to study while secretly cramming.
Speaks volumes about his ambition, maybe still wanting to fit in. Even if his memory of getting straight A's wasn't quite spot on, ninth grade was clearly a big academic leap.
And other influences, like Mr. Maestretti's history class on scientific thought, or even dissecting a planarian in biology.
It shows a mind constantly evaluating, seeking deeper meaning, questioning the why. Even losing computer access just pivoted him to analyzing the Bible with code.
And it wasn't all tech. Sailing with Kent's family, seeing Kent's dedication to mastering sailing, that showed a contrast in their interests, maybe.
True, but their conversations still circled back to computers and business ideas, researching executive salaries, mailing companies as the Lakeside Programming Group.
They were already thinking like entrepreneurs, weren't they?
Absolutely. And then the merger with St. Nicholas School creates this scheduling chaos.
Which becomes their first paid software gig, born out of a real problem.
Then the ISI payroll project. Learning COBOL, the team dynamics, Paul and Rick briefly taking over, then needing Bill back. It's like a mini drama foreshadowing future business challenges.
Late nights at the UW Computer Lab coding payroll, the trip to Portland to present, finding those surplus tapes, all building blocks.
Even that argument with Paul over the tapes, needing Fred Wright to mediate, it shows the intensity and the stakes even then.
Okay, so that brings us to their first real brushes with the business world, outside of school projects.
Right. That dispute with ISI over the promised computer time and getting his father involved, that must have really driven home the actual value of their time and skills.
And actually finishing that payroll program, their first real product, imagine figuring out all those payroll complexities, taxes, Social Security. That must have felt huge.
Definitely a major milestone. And it's interesting Kent decided not to sue ISI, maybe a sign of pragmatism.
Could be. But the scheduling problem from the Lakeside St. Nick's merger, that directly led to their next big thing.
The scheduling software itself, and the way he obsessed over it mentally for 6 months before even coding, that's pure Gates focus.
A deep immersion. And the tech back then, punch cards, Fortran, seems ancient now, but it was cutting edge.
And getting it to work successfully was a huge validation of their skills.
But amidst all this coding focus, Kent had other passions, like mountain climbing. You see their paths diverging a bit.
Yeah, and then the tragedy of Kent's death. That must have been devastating, given how close they were intellectually and as friends planning future ventures.
How do you think that impacted him, looking back?
It's hard to say definitively, of course, but losing such a close collaborator and friend so young, it likely reinforced the fragility of things, maybe intensified his own drive. You see him and Paul Allen refining that scheduling program together that summer.
Almost like a way to process it, continuing the work they started.
Perhaps. And that summer also included other, more personal teenage experiences, like getting drunk, being offered LSD.
Yeah.
It adds another layer to his relationship with Paul. They weren't just coding partners.
And the traffic counting idea they'd had with Kent, Trafigata, revisited with Paul and Paul Gilbert, initially focused on hardware.
Which is interesting because Paul Allen was already writing to Intel about their new chips around then. You see the seeds of the software focus starting to sprout, even if the initial project was hardware.
So these formative years lead him towards Harvard, but he kind of downplays the computer stuff in his application essay.
Yeah, maybe trying to present a more well-rounded picture. And he spent that summer in D.C., had a flicker of interest in politics.
But the family expectation was always a top college.
Pretty much. Even small things like seeing a play, black comedy, spurred him on to challenge himself personally. And that Bonneville Power Administration project.
Right, learning about 5.9's reliability from Bob Norton, that sounds like a serious step up in professionalism.
Huge. It exposed him to the rigor of real-world, mission-critical software engineering.
So he gets into Harvard, Yale, Princeton, chooses Harvard. Senior year sounds a bit more normal, drama club, dating Vicky, prom.
A bit of balance, maybe, before the next phase. But even that summer after graduation, working at TRW with Paul, signs of tension over future plans were already there.
Arriving at Harvard in '73, first thing he does, seeks out the PDP-10 at the Aiken Lab. No surprise there.
Meets Professor Cheatham, rooms with Jim Bain and Andy Beningo, takes Math 55, that super intense math course.
Still pushing himself academically, thriving on independent study, pushing programming limits, but also feeling a bit at loose ends.
Yeah, despite the academic side, maybe something was missing. And the famously messy room fits the stereotype of a mind elsewhere, right?
Totally.
Yeah.
Gets a C in organic chemistry. A reminder he wasn't superhuman in every subject.
And that meeting with the advisor who called him precocious, his initial negative reaction is kind of telling, maybe still a bit unsure despite everything.
But he realized he was more comfortable with adults, with adult knowledge, complex, real-world stuff.
And those ongoing debates with Paul, individual genius versus collaboration, that was a core philosophical difference emerging.
Working at TRW again just reinforced the pull of computers, especially compared to Paul's stronger hardware focus at the time, and experimenting with LSD, exploring different perspectives.
But his doubts about Trafo Data's hardware approach were growing. The software path seemed clearer. Then boom, the Altair 8800 announcement in Popular Electronics.
The light bulb moment. The personal computer revolution was starting, and they were on the sidelines.
That was the catalyst. The decision, right basic for the Altair. That was it.
Meeting Monty Davidoff, collaborating on floating point math, another crucial piece falls into place.
And those legendary coding sessions at Aiken, skipping classes, totally immersed, that incredibly fast write, run, fix cycle, that was his element.
The handshake deal with Manis, flying to Albuquerque, a huge leap of faith.
And you see the reaction from the establishment, Professor Cheatham's concern, the ethics questions, the Harvard Administrative Board review, even his grandmother Gami writing a letter urging caution.
It underscores how big a decision it was. Then the Homebrew Computer Club, the basic tape getting copied and shared.
The theft, as he saw it, a harsh early lesson in the Wild West of software. But it also sparked that bigger vision. A whole software ecosystem, not just BASIC.
Licensing BASIC through METS, developing it for the Motorola 6800 chip. Rick Weiland still involved for a time. The team is forming.
And those first real contract talks with Ed Roberts at Mentz, learning the ropes of software business negotiation.
Which leads to the move to Albuquerque, the early raw days of Microsoft, the less than luxurious living conditions.
Pickled pig's feet, Fur's cafeteria, the death trap car. It sounds intense, all-consuming.
Definitely. And tackling those memory board problems at MNs, being really direct with Ed Roberts shows his growing confidence, his focus on making things work.
But juggling Microsoft and Harvard, clearly unsustainable. And Rick Weiland deciding to leave was a big change for the early team.
But Bill and Paul, their vision for Microsoft seemed aligned. Agreeing on the equity split 6-4-36, then the MITES arbitration over the contract. Complex stuff.
Yeah, and Rick leaving for good, though Bill wrote him a strong recommendation. And needing that loan from Bob Greenberg just to make payroll shows how close to the edge they were. And finally, dealing with Tandy Radio Shack, John Roach's blunt feedback. Another dose of business reality, which ultimately leads them to decide.
Move Microsoft back home to Seattle, bringing it full circle.
So when we look back at all this, these formative years, some really clear themes jump out, don't they?
Absolutely. First, the huge impact of his family, that mix of intellectual drive, ambition, stability, and different kinds of influence.
Then there's his own incredible intensity, that laser focus, that passion for learning, starting with math and just completely consumed by computers.
And you absolutely cannot overstate the importance of those key relationships. Paul Allen, obviously, but also Kent Evans, whose loss was so significant.
And underpinning it all, a willingness to take big risks, learn constantly from challenges, dive deep into problems. You really see the early signs of that relentless drive.
The ambition was clearly there, even very early on.
For sure. What I find maybe most surprising, or at least really striking, is that moment on the hike.
The low divide hike.
Yeah, being miserable, retreating into his head, and literally coding the conceptual foundation for future work. It's such a direct link between an unexpected experience and a core innovation. Or maybe his early grasp that software was the real key, even when hardware seemed dominant.
It really makes you think, doesn't it?
Yeah.
How all these different threads, family, curiosity, friendships, challenges, wove together to create the foundation for such massive global impact. As you listen, what parts of that journey resonate with your own experiences of learning or discovery?
Yeah, and it leaves you with this thought. How often do seemingly random childhood interests or difficult experiences converge later on to shape something significant?
What's your miserable hike? What challenge are you facing now that might unexpectedly be forging a new path? Or what small project or friendship holds seeds for something bigger? It's a powerful reminder, I think, that innovation often springs from the most unlikely ground.